Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We'll give folks just a moment or so to log in and have our numbers reach a critical mass, and we'll go ahead and get started. So take some time, enjoy a last final stretch, and then we'll go ahead and dive in. Alrighty, well, I'm seeing our numbers go ahead and level off and others can trickle in. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you again for joining and welcome to today's Better Buildings webinar. We here at Better Buildings are dedicated to bringing you the latest and actionable insights from leading industry experts. And our Better Buildings webinars are a chance and really an opportunity to explore the topics, technologies, and trends that affect your organization, as well as efforts to accelerate decarbonization and energy efficiency adoption broadly. Today's webinar is called Financing the Future, Innovative Solutions for Decarbonization. And we know that many of you are embarking on groundbreaking work and need the funds to do that. So we're looking to creative ways in which to fund these projects. Before we dive into this exciting topic, just a couple housekeeping notes here at the top. First off, that today's webinar will be recorded and archived on the Better Building Solutions Center, and we'll follow up when today's recording and those slides are made available. Next, attendees in our audience in the virtual sphere are in listen-only mode. So this means that your microphones have been muted, but if you do experience any audio or visual issues throughout the webinar, please go ahead and send a message in that Q&A box located at the bottom of your Zoom panel, and our wonderful tech support team will be in touch. If you go to the next slide. My name is Bree Colin, and I will be serving as today's moderator, MC, host for the webinar. And I work in the Building Technologies office at the Department of Energy. For today's webinar, if we go to the next slide, we have a great lineup and agenda here. We're going to start off with some introductory polls just to get an understanding of who's in our virtual audience, certain familiarity with different financing mechanisms, and certain vehicles that you may have used within your organization. And then next, we have a great lineup of speakers from all different industries, be it financial institutions, some from our Better Buildings partners, to get to see practitioners and projects that they've implemented and how they have utilized certain funding mechanisms. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a great Q&A period and share some updates coming from Better Buildings. If you go to the next slide. Without further ado, happy to pop over to our polls here to start. We'll be using an interactive platform called Slido for Q&A and polling here to start. So if you could go to www.slido.com on your mobile device or by opening up a new window in your internet browser, today's event code you can utilize and punch in there is pound or hashtag DOE. If you'd like to ask panelists questions at any time during their presentation, please submit them utilizing this platform, and we'll answer those questions towards the end of the webinar. You could select a thumbs up icon too if someone has a great question that you want to make sure presenters address. If you'd like to address also a specific presenter and have them answer your question, please go ahead and note who it would be directed towards. If you'd like to upvote additional questions, that'll move certain ones to the top of the queue. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in with those polls. We want to first learn and start off by understanding who's in our virtual audience. So if you could join us over at Slido and respond to the following questions. Again, if you have any tech issues, please message our support team by utilizing that Zoom Q&A function. So our first question is to get to understand, again, what sector folks are coming from. So what sector best describes your organization? Folks who take a minute or so to enter this in. I'm seeing we're off to the races. Responses coming in. So we have great representation, I see, of contractors or consultants, potentially to start here, nonprofits and nonprofit organizations. Great. I'm seeing a good showing from industrial folks, multifamily. If we could scroll down a little bit, I'm seeing federal government representatives, higher education institutions. Wonderful. Thank you all for taking a moment or so and entering that information. We're excited to have you, and it looks like a great diversity of organizations being represented here in our virtual audience. Awesome. Okay, so if we go to the next question here, we want to understand here off the bat, which financing mechanisms are you familiar with? And this doesn't mean you have to have utilized these mechanisms in particular at your organization, but what have you heard about? And this will help us understand you too. Maybe if there's some gaps out there, if there's something that you're like, this is something new and haven't heard as much about efficiency as a service, for example. But it looks like, off the bat, a lot are familiar with traditional loans and leases, seeing a good portion familiar with energy savings performance contracts and PACE mechanisms, efficiency as a service. Good portion are familiar with on-bill financing as well. But it looks like especially an overwhelming majority familiar with traditional loans and leases. This is really helpful to know. Great. Thank you all. Appreciate it. And then our final question, if we want to go to that, is on the flip side, which mechanisms from those has your company actually used, your organization, to finance a sustainability project? And if you don't know, that's okay. For those that do know which mechanisms have been actually utilized to fund certain projects at your organization, please go ahead and take a moment or so to input that information. And I'm seeing some similar symmetry. It looks like traditional loans and leases, while most have been familiar with that, have also utilized those at their organizations. So good majority there. Looks like energy savings performance contracts too coming in here second as one often used. Don't count out efficiency as a service. Here it is, making a showing. And property assessed clean energy with those PACE solutions and green bonds. This is great. We hope for today, too, that you learn about maybe new mechanisms to utilize and hear from others that have also across different industries utilize certain things to understand what variety of mechanisms and vehicles are out there. Well, great. We'll just let a moment or so to enter in more information. Okay, we can go ahead and transition. Thank you everybody for taking some time and inputting that information. It's great for us and for our speakers to get an understanding of our virtual audience and what they're familiar with and have utilized in the past. We have a great lineup of presenters today for today's webinar. We have Samir Keshavan, Chris Barnhill, and Darren Kaiser. I'm going to share a little bit about their backgrounds and where they're coming from, just to get an understanding here off the top for our audience. Samir, with over 6 years of experience in the built environment field and project management, he is passionate about delivering sustainable facility solutions that reduce energy consumption and associated costs for clients. He holds a Master's of Science in Mechanical Engineering from South Dakota State University, as well as a Certified Energy Manager certification from the Association of Energy Engineers. Next off, we're joined by Chris Barnhill. Chris is the Director of Marketing at Skyvin Technologies, an energy as a service company cutting industrial CO2 emissions with their Skyvin Arcturus steam generating heat pump. Say that 5 times fast. Prior to joining Skyvin, Chris spent 12 years in the industrial valve industry, where he led innovation teams to help solve industry challenges and improve plant efficiencies. And then finally, we're joined by Darren Kaiser. He is the Global Energy Strategy Leader for General Mills and has over 30 years of experience in manufacturing. He first began working at General Mills in 1997, has a wealth of experience, and he worked as a plant tech manager and has a Bachelor's of Science in Industrial Engineering from Iowa State University. We're thrilled to have all of our presenters here today with us, and I'm going to first turn it over to Samir to start it off. Without further ado, take it away, Samir.
Hi, thanks, Bree, for the wonderful introduction, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'll be talking about how we at DOE are supporting our partners financing decarbonization projects. So next slide, please. Yeah. So we'll just a brief overview. We'll be going through some financial tools and resources that are on the Better Building Solutions Center, and I'll wrap it up with some industrial sector insights on the primer that's available on the Financing Navigator. Next slide. Yeah, so the Better Buildings Financing Navigator. What is it? So and where it's located? It's located inside the Better Building Solutions Center. It's an interactive tool that is designed to assist public and private organizations at large to find financing solutions for energy efficiency projects and decarbonization initiatives. It has tons of case studies, implementation models, resources, and financing products. A brief overview on why it was created, because we identified the barrier that was the lack of knowledge about non-traditional financing products, like we looked at from the poll that made partners of the Better Buildings initiative and also public at large, that the increased perception of pursuing financial models that are not very traditional. To overcome this challenge, the DOE created the Financing Navigator to house unbiased information on all types of financing products in one place. As Bree mentioned, we'll also share the links that are mentioned on this slide like at the end as well. Next slide, please. Okay. Inside the Financing Navigator, there exists a host of resources, one of them being on different financing mechanisms, traditional financing, such as leases and loans that most of the folks on this webinar are familiar with, and also specialized financing that are not so very common in pursuing energy projects. So on-bill financing, energy services, performance contract, efficiency as a service, or power purchase agreement. So in each of these particular financing mechanism, you can find primers on each of those financing product, and also some considerations, common barriers, and how they resolve some of those issues. So the chart highlights, like I said, the primers, and you can go and explore each of those particular option in depth if you're looking to utilize that. And next slide, please. Okay. So another aspect of the Financing Navigator is connecting with financial allies. And you might ask, who are financial allies, right? So financial allies are financing organizations that have been vetted and have made financial pledges to fund a certain amount of energy efficiency and decarbonization projects. The allies offer a range of products from traditional financing mechanisms like lease financing, and also to more specialized financing such as PACE, efficiency as a service, and power purchase agreements, and so on and so forth. If you already have a project in mind that you need financing for, you can go through the Navigator to find financing for your needs, punch in your preferences based on the knowledge of your project, and it'll provide the best options on which financing vehicle matches with your preferences. Another aspect is, actually, next slide, please. I think that will, yeah. So another aspect is, alternatively, if you know the financing product you want to use, and you just want to see which financial ally provides that service, you can go directly to connect with financial allies, filter using products, sectors, technologies, location, if that's one of the criteria, and filter out which financial allies would be the best suited for your particular project. We at Financial Solutions team can also help make the connection and facilitate the conversation as well. So more options to consider on how to connect with financial allies. Next slide, please. Yeah, so industrial sector financing, I just wanted to highlight that we have 6 different primers on each sector on the Better Buildings Financing Navigator. And industrial sector is energy financing primer is one of them. It's specifically tailored to the individual needs of the industrial sector. And I'll go through some common financing considerations, barriers, and solutions, and case studies in the next few slides. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the industrial sector, some material financing considerations to look into. I won't be going through all of the text, but the couple that I would like to highlight is building projects and incentives and rebates, because that's on everyone's radar. So for example, when considering energy savings performance contracts or efficiency as a service, bundling projects together often yields a better financial return on your investments. Your financing partner or institution or an ally should be able to guide you through this process. And then at the same time, they'll also be able to work with you on incentives and rebates, with IRA funds being deployed to accelerate the decarbonization. And this also helps maximize your project financials even better. Next slide, please. So some common barriers that we often hear at the Better Building Financial Solutions team is when it comes to industrial sector is limited staff bandwidth, which I believe a lot of you might be familiar with, and also planning cycle timing. So, so those are the two key ones that we often hear. And I believe in addition to that, if there's a certain timeline constraint, identifying the suitable partner to address those particular financing barriers is particularly important as you consider which project and which financing product to use. Next slide, please. So as I talked about the barriers, the common financing solutions, energy savings performance contracts, energy as a service, they all have different pros and cons to it. For example, the ESPCs and energy as a service can be structured off balance sheet and does not require upfront capital cost. You can also bundle in power purchase agreements if it suits your needs and the specific geographical regulation allows you for it. So these are all things to consider when looking at financial solutions, and the navigator has more information on each of those products, like I mentioned. Next slide, please. And I would say, in addition to these, you have more information on the primers for all different sectors on the Financing Navigator. The QR code on here takes you to the Industrial Financing Primer. If you have more questions, you can always email us at the email address betterbuildings@ee.doe.gov. I think that's on my end.
All right. Thanks, Samir.
Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, go ahead, Bree.
Samir coming from our Better Buildings Financial Solutions team. I'll add to our Financing Navigator, and a lot of that information, as one urge folks to look into that. And next, I will turn it over to Chris here. I'll add to that a lot of information that Samir just shared and that Chris and folks will go through. While it has an industrial lens, I think it's applicable to especially across a lot of sectors. We heard from similar challenges I'm sure resonate with others coming from other sectors. So thank you. We have next Chris Barnhill from Skyven Technologies. Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bree. Sorry for jumping the gun there slightly, but good morning,
No worries.
everybody.
Excited.
Yeah, ready to go. Good morning, everybody. And thanks for the introduction. Chris Barnhill with Skyven. We can go to the next slide, please. And we are a financial ally with the DOE, Better Buildings, Better Plants that Samir was mentioning. So wanted to highlight that. But we help industrial manufacturers decarbonize profitably. That's what we do here. And love to talk just briefly about that and mention kind of energy as a service. You saw it on the other slides as efficiency as a service. It could be energy as a service, heat as a service. There's a bunch of different kind of names floating around out there, but all very similar and the same kind of goal in mind. So next slide, please. So Skyven Technologies, we are an energy as a service company that delivers clean process heat to industrial facilities at prices lower than natural gas. And so in order to do that, we implement our Skyven Arcturus steam generating heat pump, and we do that on site at the manufacturer's facility, and we do it at our own cost. And then every month we share the savings with the industrial manufacturer. So they'll see savings from day one on an operating expense side. They spend no money with CapEx, and they're able to make progress on their sustainability goals, again, without spending any money upfront. Next slide, please. So just kind of taking a step back on just decarbonization projects as a whole, and Bree kind of mentioned that here on the transition, that This is about industrial decarbonization, but these kind of challenges and a lot of things I'll talk through resonate with commercial decarbonization, buildings, all of these types of projects. So a lot of things we hear and see out when people are starting decarbonization projects from a challenge or concern is, number one, complexity. A ton of options are out there, right? There's tons of technologies, providers, consultants, and it's just difficult to evaluate. So luckily there's some tools that Samir mentioned, which obviously help. But it's always a challenge to select the best fitting solution specific to your facility or building or whatever you're looking to decarbonize. So these projects are complex. Number two, there's just risk involved, right? There's risk to capital. Often these decarbonization projects require capital expense, and they don't come with a guarantee of any savings. The next one is risk to production, and this is a little more focused on industrial, but quality, throughput, safety, these are things that cannot be compromised at an industrial facility. So when you're implementing new technologies, retrofitting, doing anything to your facility, there's always that risk or concern around, is this going to mess up my production? And kind of in line with that is just risk to downtime. Again, these industrial facilities they're not able to go down for a day, 2 days, 3 days to install the latest technology. So that can't be an option, and it's a very common concern when you start talking about decarbonization projects. And then the third one is just bandwidth as a whole, and this is again across all different types of decarb projects, but they require significant oversight, management from the plant, facility, building level up to the corporate level as well. And just along those lines is just resource allocation. I think we can all agree that a lot of us wear many hats, and the people we work for and with wear a lot of hats too. So saying, hey, go throw in a decarbonization project on your table too. It's difficult. It's hard to get those moving when everyone has multiple day jobs already. So these are some key challenges we see across the board with decarbonization projects. Next slide, please. And then this slide's a little blah, so apologies, but that's where kind of energy as a service, efficiency as a service kind of comes into play. So with energy as a service, these projects require no CapEx from the customer. So no major CapEx budget approvals or fighting other departments for the available CapEx for the year. It eliminates the capital expense from the customer. Number two, the project management side. So energy as a service providers will deliver end-to-end project and construction management for the entire project, from starting to identify what solutions make sense at your facility or building, to engineering, construction, implementation, maintenance, operation. All of that falls within the energy as a service provider. So again, that really helps with that risk aspect of these projects. And then the third one here is just aligned incentives. So energy as a service providers are really incentivized to have a smooth project, an efficient project, and execution, because they invest their own capital, they have skin in the game. So when those projects aren't moving, it's not good for them. So it really incentivizes them to make sure everything's moving in the right direction on time and really and driving the results. Next slide, please. So from a Skyvan standpoint specifically, we kind of break this into two things: align and fund. So we align our financial goals with the customer's emission reductions. So again, I said earlier, we share the savings that are delivered from our clean thermal energy that we deliver on site at the facility. And that really helps align our financial goals with the emission reduction. So what's good for the facility is obviously good for Skyvan in this case. And what's bad for the facility is bad for us. So that makes us make sure our systems are saving the most amount of carbon. They're saving the most amount of money. Because that's how we get a larger pool to share those savings. And again, that's how we would make money as well. And then on the flip side, of course, if the systems are underperforming, we would have less savings to share between the two of us because there's less energy being saved. So that's obviously helps align just from the very beginning what we're all trying to do with these projects. And then on the other side is fund, which is obviously, I think, very relevant for today. So again, no CapEx up front for these projects, and Skyvan and puts our kind of skin in the game, right? Like we talked about aligning. And so from a Skyvan standpoint, we go out and secure all the grants, incentives that we possibly can to make these projects as attractive as possible for both sides. So we go out and look for the public funding grants at state level, federal level, local incentives from maybe local utilities, and we'll get into a little bit of these, but Skyven handles all of that for you. Obviously, you're involved and aware of what's going on, but we kind of take that off your plate and really help you focus on what you need to be doing on a day-to-day basis. So next slide. Obviously, always a case study is a great thing to see. So wanted to highlight this one. This was a project with Skyven and California Dairies Incorporated. They're the largest supplier of dairy powder in the US and the largest dairy manufacturer in California. So on the left side, just wanted to highlight kind of the results of this project. So they're saving over 7,000 metric tons of CO2 a year, which is great. And that's eliminating over 110,000 MMBTUs of natural gas every year with the technology that was installed for these projects. And just to kind of understand what that means, that's about 1,600 to 1,700 gas-fired cars off the road every year. So a noticeable impact and a great job by CDI for implementing these things. And they're seeing obviously progress toward their sustainability goals, which is great to see. On the second row there, so zero CapEx from CDI for these projects. They paid nothing to do these. And to date, they've seen over $420,000 in savings, and that's money in their pocket. So that's theirs. They can reinvest in their facilities, into their farmers, into their employees, whatever they need. That's their money that they're saving, again, with zero upfront CapEx. And then just quickly on the project funding, wanted to highlight kind of what was used here on these projects. So Skyven went out and applied for the California Energy Commission's FPIP, which is their Food Production Investment Program. We were able to win some money for that to go toward these projects. And then also we're able to get some local utility incentives from Pacific Gas and Electric and Southern California Gas Company. So those incentives plus the funding, we also went out and got third-party project financing, and then again, direct financing from Skyven. So when you compile all this together, that covered the costs for this project. Again, so CDI paid $0 and are seeing some great savings from an emission standpoint and also from a dollar standpoint every month, and that obviously totals up. So next slide, please. So just a few more here. I thought it'd maybe be helpful just in general when you're talking about doing an energy as a service project or efficiency as a service. Some common questions we see are things that may be helpful. So it's always, hey, when should we actually approach an energy as a service provider? From a Skyven standpoint, as early as possible in your decarbonization journey. So really understanding what projects have the most impact from a carbon standpoint, from a saving standpoint at your specific facility is really important to know up front prior to going out and looking for any funding available to help these projects move forward. The second one is what do I need to know about my facility or project? Obviously, it's great to understand, hey, what are the goals of this? Is it an emissions play? Hopefully it is. Or whatever else it is, but know what your goals are, and that will help drive the project forward. If you're going a CapEx route, you need to obviously make sure that you have an approved budget and there's money available. If you go with an energy service option, that question's a little less relevant. And then facility data. So maybe not day one, but when you're talking industrial decarbonization, at some point you're going to want to understand your natural gas usage, your electricity bills, your process flow diagrams of your facility, heat and mass balance. All of these different things come into play when you're identifying the right solution. And then what are the must-haves for an energy as a service project? We found it to be extremely helpful when there's an internal champion. So it could be you on the call here, but someone to drive this internally. If it's educating others within your company, if it's making sure people are responding, are on board, really understand what's going on here is very helpful. And then just a shared vision, and that's internally, externally with third parties and other vendors that you may use, but making sure everyone has that same vision for the project. And then along those lines, just communication, up, down, sideways. Communication is key for these projects to move. And then the last few here, which funding should come first, which is always a very common question. I think the easiest response here is, hey, Skyven will find all the grants and incentives for the project. But what that funding is used for is usually kind of your feasibility and engineering, your development capital, construction costs, project financing. But again, Skyven will go out and find all of those fundings and incentives for you to help pay for these projects. And then the last one, I'll skip the other one there. What risks should I avoid? I think the biggest risk that's out there is not starting the process, right? It's very easy to continue to read, continue to look at things, and never actually take that step forward to start the process. So that's really step number one, is just start it, have the conversation with, if it's energy as a service, great. If it's through your normal CapEx process, great, but just get started and start the process. The other risk is really doing it alone. Can it be done? Of course it can, but as we alluded to earlier, just with bandwidth and resource allocations and all the project management involved, it's very helpful to have a partner on board to help support your project. And then just be wary of unqualified vendors. Like we said earlier, tons of options out there, tons of consultants, tons of technologies. Just make sure you're using a qualified vendor, someone that's knows what they're doing. And that last piece is making sure the incentives are aligned. There's nothing worse than getting down farther in a project and realize that there's misaligned incentives and not on board. Next slide, please. So just to close out, this is my last slide here. So just kind of overall takeaways of, hey, why should my company even think about working with an energy as a service provider? So 3 key things here: profitable decarbonization. There's true savings involved when you go this route, as you could see from the California Dairies case study. And when you do this, you're decreasing your CO2 emissions and saving money without compromising your plant operations. Number 2, low risk projects. We take on and mitigate those project risks. And then lastly here, just expert guidance. So we oversee the entire project from design to installation, and we manage it over the life of the contract. So again, taking that off your day-to-day and letting you focus on what you do well, and us coming in to help on the decarbonization side. So that's all I have. Open to questions later, and if you think of one after the webinar, don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. We're thrilled to have one of our financial allies represent on this webinar. So that was really helpful information, and hopefully other folks too get in contact with you with additional questions. All righty. Well, next up, I will turn it over to Darren. Before I do so, I do see some questions flowing in through Slido. So just as a quick reminder to continue entering in those informations and upvoting any of interest. Darren, I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Bree, and I appreciate the opportunity this morning. You can go to the next slide. All right, financing decarbonization, specifically within General Mills. One of my roles as a corporate energy strategy is specifically Scope 1 and Scope 2 decarbonization for General Mills. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. And a bit of background bringing us up from 2010 to 2023, where we are today. We actually have already decarbonized really 100% of our Scope 2 from 700,000 metric tons a year down to 20,000. So, and of course, that's being done with VPPAs mainly, and then some REC purchases. Also, efficiency optimization, of course. We've been part of the DOE Better Plants since 2012, and we've been leveraging all of the great, just on-target optimization strategies that are built into that Better Plants program. We think the world of it. It's helped us a ton with all of our internal optimization work. So net, all of this decarbonization, like Chris was just talking about, trying to do decarbonization and do it profitably. To date, we've actually been $50 million total cash positive with this decarbonization work. And again, most of it has been the Scope 2 and the cash positive VPPAs, but some Scope 1 in there. Okay, and then so I've got one slide on that, and then the rest 3 or 4 slides on the efficiency optimization work that we're continuing to do going forward. Again, that's both our internal General Mills staff working on the Better Plant strategies, but what specifically I'm spending the most time on is our shared savings optimization efforts with a contractor out of Atlanta called Energy One. What we expect between now, 2024 and 2035, which is also through the end of our 15-year VPPAs and through the end of this Energy One shared savings effort, is another 200 million of expected positive cash flow. So we're going to get 100% of our scope 2 carbon zero, net zero by 2035, and we're going to get about 35% of our scope 1 eliminated. And in the end, we will have spent no money of ours, and we would have been paid $250 million. So that's it's a huge success story. And again, when I was given this task, the effort was try to decarbonize scope 1 and 2 as best you can at break-even financials. So in the end, it's been a huge win for us. So next, and then I've got 4 more slides that kind of go into a few more details. So next slide. Okay, on the VPPAs, we do have 2 huge wind farms that we offtake from on 15-year agreements out of Texas, and they've been great. They're up and running for many years now. And then a new large solar VPPA in Spain that will be covering all of our EU consumption. So in a year, General Mills globally consumes about 1.3 million megawatt hours of power, with a little more than 1 million of that being in the US. And we are matching 1.3 million megawatt hours of offtake from these VPPAs, plus some miscellaneous REC purchases. And of course, all the consumption that we have off the grid does not have fossil generation tied to it. It's hydro, nuke, whatever, it's clean. So if you think about it, we're actually over solving our fossil carbon-based power by 140%. But we really that's kind of technical for everybody here to know. But the way we talk about it is we just say that General Mills is matching 100% of all of our power used. Okay, and everybody, this is not new. Everybody is very familiar with the VPPA process. And again, with General Mills, we're just fortunate that it's been cash positive for us. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what I'm going to spend the next 3 slides on is this Energy One partnership, which we were recognized by the DOE in 2024 as a best practice, or best of the betters practice winner. So next slide. The Energy One optimization effort, because it's improving efficiency of water and gas and power. In total, it's going to save about 45,000 metric tons off of our total carbon footprint per year, and that's just going to be eliminated, plus 250 million less gallons. And this is a U.S. effort. Next slide. You can see on that spreadsheet there are the sites. Those are our large U.S. sites, 12 sites that Energy One is working on. Those make up about $100 million of annual spending of utilities, and that's about 75% of all of our North America and 60% of our global footprint. And that's where this Energy One team is working. Again, out of Atlanta, you can see their head count is down at the bottom. So basically, instead of me being in, trying to work with our plants and all of our internal efforts to try to drive efficiency, we also have this supplemental group of all these folks. And we aren't not their only client, but about 70% of their man hours right now are working on these General Mills sites. What we expect is that over the course of the engagement with them, which we think will be about 7, 8 years total, that they're going to reduce our total efficiency, or our total usage and spend, by about 10%. So they're going to be saving us this $9 million a year off of our utility bills. The way the shared savings works is we pay them 50% of what they get completed per year, per month really, but it's per year for 48 months, then we get 100% of the savings. So net, General Mills is the huge winner here. If you look at over 10 years, you know, total spend is down $90 million. We pay, you know, 16, 17 million to them. And then we cash the rest, we bank the rest. So that's what's unique about this. There is no upfront cost to General Mills. And the other unique thing is about half these people used to work for General Mills. So they're very familiar with us. They're literally PLC programmers, some of them. So they are very familiar with our systems. In a lot of cases, it's even in the same plant where they used to work. Okay, next slide, I think is the last slide. So, and again, when you are doing this type of retro commissioning, restore basic condition work, just like with all the DOE efforts, you are simplifying, you're standardizing, and you're improving reliability of your equipment. So it's not just the sustainability, it's not just the cash cost savings, but anybody who's operating a plant knows that, you know, behind all of this, you need your equipment to run reliably. And they are a great partner in helping us do that. So that's what I have, and I will, like Chris and Samir, be able to answer questions at the end here.
Thank you so much, Darren. I appreciate it. That's great information. I see some questions already coming in too from folks on that project and case study in particular and what's being utilized there at General Mills. Before we dive into that Q&A, in today's chat, you'll notice an additional resources PDF has just been sent. We encourage folks to look into that resource. It's been cultivated by our presenters and by the Better Buildings team here today. It contains links to resources from Better Buildings and our speakers on today's topic in particular. We hope that folks find this useful and a continuing resource to refer back to as you're looking to finance your own decarbonization projects. Next, we can move on to Q&A. If you haven't already, please join us over at www.slido.com with the event code hashtag or #DOE to submit and upvote questions. I will go ahead and if our panelists too could come on camera, we'll do our Brady Bunch view as I read through some questions in particular. I'm seeing here one of the more popular questions. It's not directed to a particular panelist specifically, so happy to open it up to anybody that has initial insights on this one in particular. But the note is, in addition to financing new construction, how can we incentivize building reuse and adaptation, then investment into retrofits of our existing buildings? There's a comment here that oftentimes some of our most sustainable buildings and facilities, plants are the ones that we already have. So if there's any initial thoughts from panelists on this question in particular, happy to turn it over to you.
I mean, mine's a little obviously geared on the industrial side. I don't know if this is definitely specific to buildings, but in our case, everything we do is considered a retrofit, but we do install it outside of the existing facility, so it doesn't impact current process. It's on site, but connected in 2 points, so it is a full retrofit and helping what's already there, right? Having said that, we could also do some new facilities as well, but our focus is really on existing facilities that are there today and how to improve those and reduce those carbon emissions that are there today.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chris. Great point too, with that prioritization already in place with existing. Wonderful. Darren, Samir, anything to add to you on that one? If not, I'll move on to the next one. Oh, go ahead, Samir.
No, the only thing I was going to add was with a lot of the IRA incentives can be stacked on for different projects for existing buildings and retrofits and decarbonization. For example, electrifying heaters, or like Chris mentioned, for industrial sector. So those can be used as a tool to promote retrofitting existing buildings. And as long as you can get the energy efficiency to the max, and then if you're looking for new construction, I think financially your CFOs might be more happier with you instead of going and building a new thing. So just something to consider. And we also have resources on incentives and resources hub that guides through that process and examples.
That's a great point too, Samir. And for those that are interested in the emerging information on those IRA incentives, Inflation Reduction Act, that financing and incentives hub is a great clearinghouse to start in and learn more on those emerging resources. So thank you, Samir and Chris. Appreciate it. This might go towards Samir first, but happy to hear from other panelists too. One of the next questions rising to the top is providing information on the difference in between ESPCs and energy as a service. I know, Chris, is something you deliver energy as a service, but maybe we could start off with Samir if you wanted to share some of those distinctions in between the two.
Yeah, so ESPCs and energy as a service, they're both energy service agreements. The ESPCs come with a performance guarantee. So is energy as a service. But performance contracts are typically utilized on government sectors or much market sectors primarily, just because they already own the building. It's not leased, so it works well on that particular sector. And energy as a service, like Chris mentioned, it's very similar, but the performance guarantee is stretched out to the life of the project, and they do a lot of the risk mitigation. So with ESPCs, you can take the risk on your own if you want to do your own measurement and verification, if you have staff bandwidth and capabilities, versus energy as a service stretches that to extend to the financing provider or the ESCO in this case. But we also have more information on those two specific distinctions on our primer as well. So wanted to plug that in as well.
Great plug there too, and really helpful too, educational information there on those primers. Chris, anything to add there if folks have ever come to you with that question?
Yeah, I mean, they are very similar. I mean, obviously I responded online here, but really the goal is obviously to improve efficiency at no cost or cost neutral for both. With I can speak for Skyvin. With our model, there is a performance contract where we have IoT data monitoring devices on site to track the exact amount of clean energy that's being delivered back to the facility. But with ours, we are seeing savings from day one. So not saying you're not getting that with the other option, but it's money in pocket from day one, just on reduced operating expenses. So you can use that money for how you see fit. So again, I think they are very similar and they may support each other. And you could also just add that as another acronym to the list of energy as a service, heat as a service, efficiency as a service. But I think they are very similar. And I liked what Samir said as well to explain that.
Add something more to the acronym soup there. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Similarly, on that note, maybe this one is for Chris to start. Is there anything that you recommend building owners come and ask, if it's energy as a service providers to evaluate them? They may be hearing a lot from folks out there in the field of different options, and curious what kinds of questions you might suggest that building owners ask these different type of institutions, and what details should building owners look out for with those energy as a service agreements?
Yeah, I mean, and this again, it could be for buildings or industrial. A lot of those questions I had on my slide are really important. So I hopefully you get a copy of this or can rewatch later and capture those. But I think the biggest one is being on the same page early on with any vendor, if it's energy as a service or direct to buying some new technology, and understanding what you're trying to accomplish. And it kind of sounds like a no-brainer, but you don't want to get too far down the line and try to pivot or change directions or change technologies, which would be a lot of time wasted. But I think being on having goals assigned and understood with everybody, that shared vision that I mentioned is very important. But really understand what this looks like 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the road, obviously from a carbon standpoint of what you're saving, that there's money savings involved. From a Skyvin standpoint, we'll have that conversation. We have a huge model. We'll throw all the funding and incentives and really kind of sit down and say, with this project, you're looking to save X amount of carbon, X amount of dollars off your OpEx or natural gas bills. All of those things are lined out up front. So I would I would challenge to at least have that kind of understanding before you get too far down the road.
That's a great point. Thank you, Chris. Samir, anything to add on that note? I know too, as a program, we're looking to provide some guidance to for owners and operators to set them up for success when they're navigating these types of conversations with different financing institutions out there. So curious if there's anything too you wanted to add on that front.
Yeah, so the one thing I would add on to that is assembling the right team for this project, as Chris mentioned, and I think Darren also showcased like the amount of staff that were involved in his project. So making sure all the stakeholders from your plant techs to maintenance, and then also your management and the C-suite levels, they're all aligned on the same initiative and the goal. And so that it's a smooth moving process rather than like bringing like different people at different aspects or of the project can sometimes delay, derail, or like redo the project and just makes it more complicated. So making sure all aspects of the stakeholder team are involved as early as possible so they know what to expect. I think that really makes the process go smoother.
That's a great point. Thank you, Samir. Appreciate it. The next question we have is for Darren, kind of geared towards the VPPAs that you all chose as a financing mechanism. Some folks in our virtual audience aren't as familiar with that as an option. So I'm kind of curious how you would describe what a VPPA is and how you all came to the decision of choosing that as a strategy to embark upon.
Sure. So VPPAs that we have been working on are basically offtake from wind farms or big solar farms, where these are industrial or utility scale, so that they're actually putting the green power onto the grid. So we're feeling like we're taking all this, power off the grid, and we wanted to be able to add green power to the grid, and of course, all of the standard protocols for carbon accounting would say that if you're doing that, then you can basically take the megawatt hour that you're pulling off and match it with the megawatt hour that you're putting on, and net that megawatt hour down to zero carbon, even though you know that the power that you used off the grid was maybe made with a coal plant or a natural gas powered plant. It's that carbon accounting that we do as a corporation. I think most corporations are doing. They're trying to figure out what is our carbon footprint and then how do we reduce it. So both we're actually sending green power onto the grid, and we're carbon accounting ourselves, in our case down to zero for scope 2 carbon, which is the carbon tied to the power that you use. And how we determine the VPPAs that we were going to use, we were looking again for break even. So the other method is to purchase RECs, one at a time, year after year after year, every year. And our thought was, instead of doing that, which we know is going to cost, $1 a REC, $2, $3, $4, depending on the year, we wanted to be able to hopefully get break even. So you can structure that offtake agreement with the developer and the project owner in a way that that you are guaranteed that you're going to pay them a certain price, and then you're going to settle plus or minus with what the grid price actually is at that moment that your power is going onto the grid. And that is called in our case, again, it's called an energy swap or a swap for differences contract. And it's all part of the standard way of doing these VPPAs. And we don't have to put any money up front at all. We just have to agree to this offtake agreement. And in our case, again, we have been cash positive because of the agreements that we negotiated. Not everybody is, and I think it's getting, all of most of the really good profitable places to put wind farms and solar farms, they're getting taken. So, as you come in, it's more and more difficult maybe to be profitable, but I guess that's the general concept.
That was great. Thank you so much, Sharon. It's great to hear too from folks that have utilized that, their experience with it and success overall. So that's wonderful. And on our financing navigator too, there's more information on that kind of distinction and definition too of that VPPA in particular. Great. We have time here just maybe for another question or two before closing. And one is kind of connected to some information shared earlier, but I did just want to touch on it. It's a question about the financing navigator in particular, and it's encompassing of new and forthcoming information on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund financing. So similarly, I would direct folks to that financing and incentives hubs as kind of maybe a first landing page for some of that information. Samir, anything you'd add to on that I might have missed?
Are you talking specifically about the GGRF
Yes.
question? Okay. So I would highlight that the money still being funneled down to different states. So it's still in the early process of disseminating right now. And we did recruit Community Preservation Corporation. They're one of the recipients of the GGRF money that's coming out. So in the coming weeks or months, we will have more information on the incentives hub, but also on how different nonprofits and green banks are utilizing those funds for projects. So yes, in short, we'll have more information.
More to stay tuned. Coming soon. Wonderful. Thanks, Samir. Appreciate it. All righty. And the next one I see Darren already replied to in the chat, but it was the question around if General Mills matches power hour to hour, and it looks like that response was monthly totals. Darren, anything there too you wanted to add on?
Yeah, I can add because another related question came up. So there's different protocols out there, and I don't think there's any one absolute process that you have to use or method, but we follow the RE100 protocols that are part of the climate groups. That tends to be, I think, an industry standard. And what RE100 says is that you don't have to match hour for hour. They say you basically can take your total consumption in a region and match it with power that you're putting onto the grid from a VPPA in that region. And if you're matching even over the course of a year, I mean, we do it monthly and quarterly, but the protocols would say in the course of a year, and really most companies use their fiscal year or calendar year, but we use fiscal year. And so you don't have to do hour for hour. So again, not that that's a bad idea, but we're not doing that. And then the other question was related to those regions. And again, we use the RE100 protocol that is a little different. I mean, it says in Canada, you can use your Texas wind farms to match your Canada usage. So it's kind of a long way away. And then in another case, they say you can't use your China offtake to match Taiwan consumption. So it's maybe not a perfect system. Those are a couple kind of oddballs out of the system, out of what they currently have. But if you look at it on one big Earth, perspective, I think maybe in the end, that's what they're trying to get is take off a megawatt, put on a megawatt.
That makes sense. Thanks so much, Darren. Appreciate it. And with that, I'm just going to close here with a couple final announcements. And thank you to all of our panelists for answering those questions and for your presentations, for those insightful responses. This webinar is a part of our Better Buildings summer webinar series for 2024. And as you can see, we have a great collection of presentations every Tuesday for the end of this series. And then we'll announce our next annual series going towards fall through the spring here soon. So please visit the Better Building Solutions Center to learn more and register. On the next slide, we hope that you join us for our next webinar in this series on July 30th, titled Building Owner Spotlight, DOE's Smarter Small Buildings Campaign. So join this webinar to hear more from building owners that have been recognized for this campaign, in particular for their exemplary work installing and operating HVAC controls. on the next slide. And finally, with that, I'd like to close by thanking again our panelists so much for taking the time to be here with us today. In addition to our virtual audience, thank you all for being here, asking your questions. We hope folks can also get in contact with the presenters if you have any further additional questions. Feel free to contact them directly if we couldn't get to that. And I encourage folks, because we are hip and happening here at Better Buildings, we have a social media presence. So please follow our Better Buildings Initiative presence there on LinkedIn and X, formerly Twitter, for all the latest news. You can find our handles there by their respective icons on the left-hand side of the slide. And you'll receive an email notice too, again, when today's recording, slides, and transcript are made available on the Better Buildings Solutions Center. Thank you everybody so much again for joining. We hope folks have a good rest of your day and take care.